Hey guys, it's me, Poppy Rain here, coming to you with another video. In today's video, we're going to be reading another story from the Book of Children's Classics. Today's story we're going to be reading is Sam Gribbley, From My Side of the Mountain, by Jean Craighead George. As usual, we're going to read the About section, and we're going to skip through the parts that aren't important, just the parts that are relevant to the book, because this is not a full story. This is just part of the story. About Sam Gribbley. When she was in elementary school, Jean Craighead George packed her suitcase and told her mother she was going to run away from home. As she envisioned it, she would live by a waterfall in the woods and catch fish on hooks made from the forks of tree limbs, as she had been taught by her father. Wisely, her mother said not to try to dissuade her. She checked her daughter's bag to see if she had her toothbrush and kissed her goodbye. 40 minutes later, the girl was home. Jean Craighead George's love of nature had been an inspiration for her more than 40 books for young people. George's father, a naturalist and scientist, taught her the plant and animals of eastern forests. Her brothers, two of the first licensed falconers in the United States, helped her in the training of falcons. George remembered a huge tree her brothers had camped in on an island in Potomac River. In her mind, the tree would be Sam Gribbley's home, as she found ways to survive in the Catskill Mountains. The first draft of My Side of the Mountain was done in 2 weeks. My Side of the Mountain was first published in the spring of 1959 and has been translated into many languages. It is a Newbery Honor Book, an ALA Noble Book, and a Hans Christian Andersen Award Honor Book. Known and loved by readers around the world, it was described by the Horn Books as extraordinary. It will be read year after year, linking together many generations in the chain of well-remembered joy and refreshment. The novel was also made into a major motion picture in 1969 by Paramount Picture Camp. This is My Side of Sam Gribbley, in which I hole up in a snowstorm. I am on my mountain in a tree home that people have passed without ever knowing I'm here. The house is a hemlock tree, 6 feet in diameter, and must be as old as the mountain itself. I came upon it last summer and dug and burned it out until I made a snug cave in the tree that I now call home. My bed is on the right as you enter, and it's made of ash slats and covered with deerskin. On the left is a small fireplace about knee-high. It is of clay and stone. It has a chimney that leads the smoke out through a knothole. I chipped out 3 other knotholes to let fresh air in. The air coming in is bitter cold. It must be below 0 outside, and yet I can sit here inside the tree and write with bare hands. The fire is small, too. It doesn't take much fire to warm this tree room. In the 4th of December, I think. It may be the 5th. I'm not sure, because I have not recently counted the notches in the aspen pole that is my calendar. I have been just too busy gathering nuts and berries, smoking venison, fish, and small game to keep up with the exact date. The lamp I am writing by is deer fat poured into a turtle shell with a strip of my old city trousers for a wick. It snowed all day yesterday and today. I have not been outside since the storm began. I am bored for the first time since I ran away from home 8 months ago to live on the land. I am well and healthy. The food is good. Sometimes I eat turtle soup. I don't know how to make acorn pancakes. Oh, and I know how to make acorn pancakes. I keep my supplies in the wall of the tree in a wooden pocket I chopped myself. Every time I have looked at those pockets during the last 2 days, I have felt just like a squirrel. Which reminds me, I didn't see a squirrel one whole day before the storm began. I guess they are holed up and eating their stored nuts too. I wonder if the Baron, that's the wild weasel who lives behind the big boulder to the north of my tree, is also denned up. Well, anyways, I think the storm is dying down because the tree is not crying so much. When the wind really blows, the whole tree moans right down to the roots, which is where I am. Tomorrow, I hope the Baron and I can tunnel out into the sunlight. I wonder if I should dig the snow. But that would mean I would have to put it somewhere, and the only place to put it is in my nice snug tree. Maybe I can pack it with my hands as I go. I've always dug into the snow from the top, never up from under. The Baron must dig up from under the snow. I wonder where he puts what he digs. Well, I guess I'll know in the morning. When I wrote that last winter, I was scared and thought maybe I'd never get out of my tree. I had been scared for 2 days, ever since the first blizzard hit the Catskill Mountains. When I came up to the sunlight, which I did by simply poking my head into the soft snow and standing up, I laughed at my dark fears. Everything was white, clean, shining, and beautiful. The sky was blue, blue, blue. The hemlock grove was laced with snow. The meadow was smooth and white, and the gorge was sparkling with ice. It was so beautiful and peaceful that I laughed out loud. I guess I laughed because my first snowstorm was over, and it had not been so terrible after all. Then I shouted I did it. My voice never got very far. It was hushed by the tons of snow. I looked for a sign from the Baron Weasel. His footsteps were all over the boulder. Also slides where he had played. He must have been up for hours, enjoying the new snow. Inspired by his fun, I poked my head into the tree and whistled. Frightful, my trained falcon flew to my fist, and we jumped and slid down the mountain, making big holes and trenches as we went. It was good to be whistling and carefree again, because I was sure scared by the coming of that storm. I had been working since May, learning how to make a fire with flint and steel, finding what plants I could eat, how to trap animals and catch fish. All this was so that when the curtain of blizzard struck the Catskills, I could crawl inside my tree and be comfortably warm, have plenty to eat. During the summer and fall, I had thought about the coming of winter. However, on that third day of December, when the sky blackened and the temperatures dropped, and the first flakes swirled around me, I must admit I wanted to run back to New York. Even the first night I spent out in the woods, when I couldn't get the fire started, was not so frightening as a snowstorm that gathered behind the gorge and mushroomed up over my mountain. I was smoking 3 trout. It was 9 o'clock in the morning. I was busy keeping the flames low so they would not leap out and burn the fish. As I worked, it occurred to me that it was awfully dark for the hour of the morning. Frightful was leashed to her tree stub. She seemed restless and pulled at her tethers. Then I realized that the forest was dead quiet. Even the woodpeckers that had been tapping around me all morning were silent. The squirrels were nowhere to be seen. The juncos and cicadas and chickadees and nuthatches were gone. I looked to see what the bear and weasel was doing. He was not around. I looked up. From my tree, you can see the gorge beyond the meadow. White water pours between the black, wet boulders and cascades into the valley below. The water that day was as dark as the rocks, only the sound told me it was still falling. Above the darkness stood another darkness. The clouds of winter, black and fearsome. They looked as wild as the winds that they were bringing them. I grew sick with fright. I knew I had enough food. I knew everything was going to be perfectly all right. But knowing that didn't help. I was scared. I stamped out the fire and pocketed the fish. I tried to whistle for Frightful, but couldn't purse my shaking lips tight enough to get anything but piff. So I grabbed her by the hide straps that were attached to her legs, and we dove through the deerskin door into my room in the tree. I put Frightful on the bedpost and curled up in a ball on the bed. I thought about New York and the noises and the lights and how a snowstorm always seemed very friendly there. I thought about our apartment too. And at that moment, it seemed bright and lighted and warm. I had to keep saying to myself, there were 11 of us in it. Dad, Mother, 4 sisters, 4 brothers, and me. And not one of us liked it, except perhaps little Nina, who was too young to know. Dad didn't like it even a little bit. He had been a sailor once, but when I was born, he gave up the sea and worked on the docks in New York. Dad didn't like the land. He liked the sea, wet and big and endless. Sometimes he could tell me about great-grandfather Gribbley, who owned land in the Catskill Mountains and fled the trees and built a home and plowed the land, only to discover that he wanted to be a sailor. The farm failed, and great-grandfather Gribbley went to sea. As I lay with my face buried in the sweet, greasy smell of my deerskin, I could hear Dad's voice saying, "The land is still in the family's name, somewhere in the Catskills, in an old beech with the name Gribbley carved on it. It marks the northern boundaries of Gribbley's folly. The land is no place for a gribbley. The land is no place for a gribbley, I said. The land is no place for a gribbley. And here I am, 300 feet from the beach with gribbley carved on it. I fell asleep at that point. When I awoke, I was hungry. I cracked some walnuts, got down the acorn flour I had pounded with a bit of ash to remove the bite, reached out the door for a little snow, and stirred up some acorn pancakes. I cooked them on top of a tin can, and as I ate them, smothered with blueberry jam, I knew that the land was just the place for a gribbley. In which I get started on this venture. I left New York in May. I had a penknife, a ball of cord, an axe, and $40, which I had saved from selling magazine subscriptions. I also had some flint and steel, which I had bought at a Chinese store in the city. The man in the store had showed me how to use it. He had also given me a little purse to put it in, and some tinder to catch the sparks. He told me that if I ran out of tinder, I should burn cloth and use the charred ashes. I thanked him and said, "This is the kind of thing I am not going to forget." On the train north to the Catskills, I unwrapped my flint and steel and practiced hitting them together to make sparks. On the wrapping paper, I made these notes. A hard brisk strike is best. Remember to hold the steel in the left hand and flint in the right, and hit the steel with the flint. The trouble is, sparks go every which way. And that was the trouble. I did not get a fire going that night. As I mentioned, this was a very scary experience. I hitched rides into the Catskill Mountains. At about 4 o'clock, a truck driver and I passed through a beautiful dark hemlock forest, and I said to him, "This is as far as I'm going." He looked all around and said, "You live here?" "No," I said, "but I'm running away from home, and this is just the kind of forest I've always dreamed I would run to, and I think I'll camp here tonight." I hopped out of the cab. "Hey, boy," the driver shouted. "Are you serious?" "Sure," I said. "Well, now, ain't that something? You know, when I was your age, I did the same thing. Only I was a farm boy and ran to the city. And you're a city boy running to the woods. I was scared of the city. Do you think you'll be scared of the woods?" "Heck no," I shouted loudly. I marched into the cool, shadowy woods. I heard the driver call to me. "I'll be back in the morning if you want to ride home." He laughed. Everybody laughed at me, even Dad. I told Dad that I was going to run away to great-grandfather Gribbley's land. He had roared with laughter and told me about the time he had run away from home. He got on a boat headed for Singapore, but when the whistle blew for departure, he was down the gangplank and home in bed before anyone knew he was gone. He told me, "Sure, go try it. Every boy should try it." I must have walked a mile into the woods until I found a stream. It was a clear, athletic stream that rushed and ran and jumped and splashed. Ferns grew along the bank, and its rocks were upholstered with moss. I sat down, smelled the piney air, and took out my penknife. I cut off a green twig and began to whittle. I have always been good at whittling. I carved a ship once that my teacher exhibited for parents' night at school. First, I whittled an angle on one end of the twig. Then, I cut a smaller twig and sharpened it to a point. I whittled an angle on the twig, bound the two angles face to face with a strip of green bark. It was supposed to be a fish hook. According to the book on how to survive on the land that I read in the New York Public Library, this was the way to make your own hook. Then I dug for worms. I had hurriedly chopped the moss away with my axe before I hit frost. It had not occurred to me that there would be frost in the ground in May. But then I had not been on a mountain before. This didn't worry me, because I was depending on fish to keep me alive until I got to my grandfather's mountain, where I was going to make traps and catch game. I looked into the stream to see what else I could eat. As I did, my hand knocked a rotten log apart. I remembered about old logs and all the sleeping stags of insects that are in it. I chopped away until I found a cold white grub. I swiftly tied a string to my hook, put the grub on, and walked up the stream looking for a good place to fish. All the manuals I had read were very emphatic about where fish lived, and so I had memorized this. In streams, fish usually congregated in pools and deep, calm water. The heads of riffles, small rapids, and tails of a pool. Eddies below rock or log, deep undercut banks, in the shade of overhanging bushes, all are very likely places to fish. The stream did not seem to have any calm water, and I must have walked 1,000 miles before I found a pool by a deep undercut bank in the shade of overhanging bushes. Actually, it wasn't that far. It just seemed that way, because as I went looking and finding nothing, I was sure I was going to starve to death. I squatted on this bank and dropped in my line. I did so want to catch fish. One fish would set me upon my way, because I had read how much you can learn from one fish. By examining the contents of its stomach, you can find what the other fish are eating, or you can use the internal organs as bait. The grub went down to the bottom of the stream. It swirled around and hung still. Suddenly, the string came to life and rode back and forth around in a circle. I pulled with a powerful jerk. The hook came apart, and whatever I had went circling back to its bed. Well, that almost made me cry. My bait was gone. My hook was broken. I was getting cold, frightened, and mad. I whittled another hook, but this time I cheated and used string to wind it together instead of bark. I walked back to the log and luckily found another grub. I hurried to the pool and flipped a trout out of the water before I knew I had a bite. Fish flopped and I threw my whole body over it. I could not bear to think of flopping myself back into the stream. I checked it like I had seen the man at the fish market do. Examined the stomach and found it empty. This horrified me. What I didn't know was that an empty stomach means the fish are hungry and they will eat about anything. However, I thought at the time I was a goner. Sadly, I put some of the internal organs on my hook, and before I could get my line to the bottom, I had another bite. I lost that one, but got the next one. I stopped when I had 5 nice little trout and looked around for a place to build a camp and make a fire. It was hard to find a pretty spot along the stream. I selected a place beside a mossy rock in a circle of hemlocks. I decided to make a bed before I cooked. I cut off some boughs for a mattress, and I leaned some dead limbs against the boulders and covered them with hemlock limbs. This made a kind of tent. I crawled in, lay down, and felt alone in secret and very excited. But the rest of the story. I was on the northern side of the mountain. It grew dark and cold early. Seeing the shadow slide down on me, I frantically ran around gathering firewood. This was about the only thing I did from that moment until dawn, because I remembered the driest wood in the forest is the dead limbs that are still on the tree. I gathered an enormous pile of them. The pile must still be there, for I never got a fire going. I got sparks, sparks, sparks. I even hit the tinder with the sparks. The tinder burned all night. That was as far as I got. Blew on it, breathed on it, cupped it in my hands, but no sooner did I add twigs, the whole thing went black. Then it got too dark to see. I clicked steel and flint together. Even though I couldn't see the tinder, finally I gave up and crawled into my hemlock tent, hungry, cold, and miserable. I can talk about the first night now, although it's still embarrassing to me because I was so stupid and scared that I hate to admit it. I made my hemlock bed right in the stream valley where the wind drained down from the cold mountaintop. It might have been all right if it had been on the other side of the boulder, but it didn't. It was right on the main highway of the cold winds as they tore down upon the valley below. I didn't have enough hemlock boughs under me, and before I had my head down, my stomach was cold and damp. I took some boughs off the roof and stuffed them under me, and then my shoulders were cold. I curled up in a ball and was almost asleep when the whippoorwill called. If you've ever been within 40 feet of a whippoorwill, you will understand why I couldn't even shut my eyes. They're deafening. Well, anyways, the whole night went like that. I don't think I slept 15 minutes, and I was so scared and tired that my throat was dry. I wanted a drink but didn't dare go near the stream for fear of making a misstep and falling in and getting wet. So I sat tight and shivered and shook, and now I am able to say I cried a little tiny bit. Fortunately, the sun had a wonderful, glorious habit of rising every morning. When the sky lightened, when the birds awoke, I knew I would never again see anything so splendid as the round red sun coming up over the earth. I was immediately cheered and set out directly for the highway. Somehow I thought that if I was a little nearer the road, everything would be all right. I climbed the hill and stopped. There was a house warm and cozy, with smoke coming out of the chimney and lights in the window, and only 100 feet from my torture camp. Without considering my pride, I ran down the hill and banged on the door. A nice old man answered. I told him everything in one long sentence, and he said, "And so, can I cook my fish here, because I haven't eaten in years?" He chuckled, stroked his whiskery face, and took the fish. He had them cooked in a pan before I knew what his name was. Then I asked him. He said Bill something, but I never heard his last name because I fell asleep in the rocking chair that was pulled up beside his big, hot, glorious wood stove in the kitchen. I ate the fish some hours later, also some bread, jelly, oatmeal, and cream. Then he said to me, "Sam Gribbley, If you are going to run off and live in the woods, you better learn how to make a fire. Come with me." We spent the afternoon practicing. I penciled these notes on the back of scraps of paper so I wouldn't forget. When the tinder glows, keep blowing and add fine dry needles one by one and keep blowing steadily, lightly, and evenly. And 1-inch dry twigs to the needles and give her a good big handful of small dry stuff. Keep blowing. The manner in which I find the Gribbley's farm. The next day, I told Bill goodbye, and as I strode, warm and fed, onto the road, he called to me, "I'll see you tonight. The back door will be open if you want a roof over your head." I said okay, but I knew I wouldn't see Bill again. I knew how to make a fire, and that was my weapon. With the fire, I could conquer the Catskills. I also knew how to fish and to make a fire, and that was all I needed to know, I thought. 3 rides that morning took me to Delhi. Somewhere around here was great-grandfather's beech tree with the name Gribbley carved on it. This much I knew from Dad's stories. By 6 o'clock, I still had not found anyone who had even heard of the Gribbleys, much less Gribbley's Beach. And so I slept on the porch of the schoolhouse and ate chocolate bars for supper. It was cold and hard, but I was so tired I could even sleep in a wind tunnel. At dawn, I thought real hard. Where would I find out about the Gribbley farm? "Some old map," I said. Where would I find an old map? The library? Maybe. I'll try it and see. The librarian was very helpful. She was sort of young, had brown hair and brown eyes, and loved books as much as I did. The library didn't open until 10:30. I got there at 9 after. I had lulled and rolled and sat on the steps for 15 or 20 minutes. The door was open, and this tall lady asked me to come on in and browse around until opening time. All I said to her was that I wanted to find the old Gribbley farm, and that the Gribbleys had lived on it for many 100 years, and she was off. I can still hear her heels click when I think of her scattering herself around those shelves, finding me old maps, histories of the Catskills, and files of letters and deeds that must have come from attics around Delhi. Miss Turner, that was her name, found it. She found Gribbley's farm in an old book of Delaware County. Then she worked out the road to it and drew me maps and everything. Finally, she said, "What do you want to know for? Some school project?" "Oh, no, Miss Turner. I want to go live there." The end.